I'm infatuated with her. Utterly infatuated. And it wasn't at a healthy level. Far from it. I would think about her every moment she was away. I would sometimes sit on my couch and just stare at my phone, waiting for her to text. I'd tell myself, don't contact her. Don't. It will come off as too strong. But then I'd still find myself clicking her name in my contact list before my inner voice would continue. You don't want her to know how desperately smitten you are with her. It's unattractive. It will scare her off. No, you must wait for her to call you this time. But it was excruciating and exhausting, almost unbearable. I once heard that the ancient Greeks believed that falling madly and irrationally in love with somebody was a curse that you would wish upon your enemies. I could never understand what they meant. After all, isn't falling head over heels in love the ultimate goal nowadays? But now that it's happened to me, I have to say, the ancient Greeks were right. This is a curse. I was barely in control of myself, almost as though my infatuation with her had possessed me. The two of us were sexually active together, but still in the dating phase. We were at the make or break era of a blossoming relationship, where we'd either have the talk and formally be in a relationship, or we'd slowly start to drift apart. The latter of which I don't think I'd be able to cope with. Honestly, I wouldn't be able to. Almost everything about her captivated me. The way she held her hand over her mouth when she laughed, how she'd caress the pendant of her necklace when she was frightened, how she'd twirl her hair in her finger when she was excited. All of it. Her smell, her smile, her eyes. Yeah, I know, it probably makes you sick reading about it. I feel the same way. I was never the hopeless romantic type, but now I can't stop fantasizing about her. I think about us doing the long 3-hour hike up to the magnificent view from one of our first days, to that first kiss, as we overlooked the lights of the city. But this time, I'd get down on one knee, bring out the ring, and well, you know what would happen next. Alright, fine, I'll stop. Yes, this is a girl I'd only been casually dating for a couple of months. I shouldn't be thinking about proposing yet, I know that. I'm just barely able to control myself any longer. I feel as though I'm losing power of the decisions I make. And that brings me to why I'm here, writing this out at the moment. It started with the first real thing that troubled me about her. We'd never actually spent a night together. No matter how late she was over, once either of us showed signs of being tired, she'd up and leave. She wouldn't leave awkwardly or in anger, just a casual kiss goodnight, a smile, and a call me soon. It was something I didn't really even notice the first few times she did it, but after almost 8 weeks of dating, it was becoming strange. I'd have to ask her about it. It took drinking almost an entire bottle of wine before I had the courage to do it. She looked almost defeated when I asked and lowered her eyes in embarrassment. I knew this talk would come eventually, she started. She took in a deep breath with a long drawn-out exhale. Recently, she paused again. I've started talking in my sleep. She shook her head in embarrassment. It's called somniloquy. I looked it up. I shrugged and laughed out loud. My demeanour seemed to say, that's it. No, Stephen, listen, she said. She wasn't laughing. It's bad. It's completely out of control. It's not just random words or gibberish. No, it's horrible. I say horrible, disgusting things. She was starting to raise her voice, breathe heavy, and tear up. I approached her and held her. I told her it couldn't be that bad. I told her to spend the night. I told her she was probably exaggerating. I was wrong. That night she stayed at my house, but she warned me of something before falling asleep. Whatever you do, don't wake me up. It makes me really scared and disoriented if that happens. And don't respond to me. Just ignore it. I nodded and agreed. If it becomes too much, she continued, just leave the room and sleep on the couch. I won't mind. I told her not to worry about it. I told her that it wouldn't be a big deal. I told her I wouldn't leave the couch. I'd stay beside her in the bed. But I was wrong. I couldn't last one night. We both fell asleep without incident. I don't know how many hours passed, but I woke up in the dark with the sensation that someone was watching me. And then I remembered she was with me. She was actually spending the night. I smiled, but then I noticed the shadowy outline of her sitting up on the bed. She was looking down at me, staring. It creeped me out, I'll admit it. Her posture was entirely different. It was as though it wasn't even her at all. And then she spoke. It wasn't her voice that I heard. It was much lower and gravelly, like something out of a horror movie. "I'll chew the skin from your bones," she said. I froze. At first I just kept looking at her. This was not at all what I expected. I thought it would be more like the way Tourette's is often portrayed, just random swearing and shouting. I honestly thought to myself, what will I do if she attacks me right now? What if she really does try to chew my skin from my bones? But then she just lied down and went back to sleep. I was creeped out. I tried to lie back down and ignore her, but struggled. I couldn't even close my eyes without thinking, maybe she's sitting up again and staring at me. And then one time I rolled over to look at her, and she was. Her face was pressed right towards mine. Her breath was foul and rotted, something that was most certainly not normal for her. She spoke again, in the same voice as before. "If you don't move to the couch, you'll be dead by morning." That did it for me. I sat up in a moment and headed for the living room. She made some sort of wheezing sound as I left. I think it was supposed to be laughter. I was lying on the couch, but I wasn't going to be able to fall back to sleep. I was far too shaken. I was staring out towards the window, hoping to see the first few hints of the sun rising. And then I thought I heard something from the bedroom. I listened, and then I heard it again. "Stephen." It was the same low and gravelly voice. It sounded like a witch. I tried to just ignore it at first, but then it continued. "Stephen." Still, I said nothing. "I know you can hear me, Stephen. You're awake now. Why don't you come back into the bedroom?" The voice barely sounded human. Or maybe you'd prefer if I come to you. I still didn't say anything. I was told not to, but I listened. If I heard her start walking towards the bedroom door, I'm not even joking, I would have run right out of the apartment, but she'd asked me not to respond to her sleep talking, so I didn't. And then I heard once more. "Sorry if this spoils your plans," she began laughing. "The two of you were supposed to walk that trail again," she started. I wasn't even remotely prepared for what she'd say next. "You'd both be so tired when you'd reach the top. You'd look over the city, then you'll get on one knee and bring out the ring." She began laughing, and that's when I realized this wasn't just a problem with sleep talking. It was something much more. Something supernatural. I had never told anybody about my proposal fantasy. There was simply no way she could have known about any of it. This was no longer about merely talking in one's sleep. This was about possession. I can't go back into that bedroom. I have no idea what would happen if I did. Instead, I'm going to wait it out, holding up in my living room until the sun rises. I have a couple more hours yet. I can hear her laughing occasionally in the bedroom. It's still not her voice. Still the same low-pitched cackle. But as I sit on my couch writing this out, here's what scares me the most. Maybe my infatuation and utter obsession with her wasn't normal. I said before that I felt like I was losing control of myself. More so, I believed in the typical falling in love story. No. I fear that the infatuation I felt was the entity slowly taking control of me. Of it controlling my thoughts, fears, ambitions, and anxieties. Maybe once I become completely absorbed, a transfer would occur, and she would be free of it. I know I should leave, that I should open the front door, get in my car, and drive away from here. But I can't. I can't leave her. I've already lost control. I'm infatuated with her. Utterly infatuated. I've always had a weak heart. Not just physically. I've always been afraid of my own shadow. It was unsurprising when the doctors told me my heart murmur wasn't just a heart murmur. A year of tests, a year of therapy, constant trips to the hospital, and I was finally told that it had all been for nothing. My poor weak heart wouldn't last till Christmas. It's a strange thing being told that you're dying. I didn't come to terms with it at first. I drank and I spent my money. I did reckless, stupid things because I was so damn scared. Then I got the news that a young woman called Laura had been declared brain dead, and that I, the lucky chosen one, would be getting a brand new heart a week later. I drove to the hospital slowly, carefully, and readied myself for the ordeal that was to come. As I was lying in bed on the last night, the thought of Laura swirled around in my head, and it wouldn't leave me alone. It was like her name was in flashing lights every time I closed my eyes. It was wrong, I know it was, but I had to see the woman who was giving me her heart. It didn't feel right not to put a face to the one who was saving my life. I knew her name. I knew what ward she was staying on. I had overheard the two nurses discussing it. I wandered down the meandering hallways until I found what I was looking for, taking my time, making sure I didn't miss any name. I guess I had time on my hands now. In the second to last room, she lay in a bed. A woman sat on the bed next to her, holding her hand, and my own weak heart stuttered. "Excuse me." I had no idea what to say to her. "I'm Jenna. I'm the person I'm having surgery tomorrow," and what I assumed was Laura's mother stood up, and I could tell from the look in her eyes that she knew who I was. "Thank you for visiting. I know it's strange, but a part of her is going to be living on in you. I wanted to meet you." I stood there, helpless and lost for words. Laura's mother beckoned me over. "Please," she said, "don't feel uncomfortable. It's what she would have wanted." I sat on the chair next to Laura. "How did she—" I broke off. It was too awful to ask. Laura's mother gave me a thin smile. "She was a care worker. Looked after battered wives, abused women. Last month she met a guy and, well, I suppose years of training can't help you when you're in love. She ignored the warning signs, and he killed her. She dedicated her life to those who needed her." Laura's mother looked down. I don't know why I did it, but I reached over and held Laura's hand. I squeezed it. "I'm so sorry. I had a boyfriend once he was like that too. Someone like Laura convinced me to leave." Laura's mother gave me another half smile. I could see the tears in her eyes. Then Laura squeezed my hand, tightly. She gripped me so hard that her fingernails dug into my skin. I recoiled, a look of horror on my face. Laura's mother looked at me calmly. She squeezes my hand sometimes as well. I think the doctors called it muscle spasms. Either way, there's none of Laura left in there anymore. I looked at the small crescent moons that had just started to bleed off the palm of my hand. The surgery went perfectly. I was wheeled to the recovery suite after it was over and done with. The raised wound on my chest covered by gauze. It was better if I didn't see it, I thought. I didn't need any more heart issues. I spent the first day doped up on the pain medication, eating only a little and sitting up maybe 2 times. It was a long process, they reassured me. Laura's mother came to visit me the day before I was due to leave. Her calm demeanour hadn't wavered, but I could see that she was suffering. She looked 10 years older, and her hand shook when she gave me a hug. "When are you going home?" "Tomorrow," I told her. "Please come visit whenever you want." I started to jot down my address for her, when out of the corner of my eye, a flash of blonde disappeared through the doorway. The same brilliant blonde as Laura's hair. "Ow!" I cried out suddenly. It felt like someone had sharply squeezed my hand so hard it had almost crushed the bones. Laura's mother rushed to my side, a look of concern in her eyes. "What's wrong? Is it your heart?" She stumbled over the last words, coming to terms with what she had said. I tried to reassure her and said I'd let the doctors know, and she left with a look of worry on her face. When I looked down, a new set of crescent fingernail marks were below the ones that Laura's had made. 10 identical bleeding smiles. The taxi ride home was short, and before I knew it, I was back in my own flat. It felt strange to try and slot back into where I had left off. My life had been almost over the last time I'd been here. I looked over the mess and the cardboard boxes, the remnants of one night where I had tearfully tried to pack and store my belongings so my parents wouldn't have to do it when I died. Laura's heart beat so strongly it felt like it would come out of my chest. It did this all the time. and I realized that this was what a healthy heart must feel like. So why couldn't I shake my feelings of unease? That night, I had a dream. Laura was in her hospital bed, but her mother was gone. I could hear my heart, Laura's heart, beating in my eardrums so loudly it was painful. I tried to cover them, but my hands were pinned to my sides. Some unexplainable force was moving me towards the motionless figure of Laura on the bed. Her lips were blue and the window had come open, whipping her blonde hair around her face. I was almost on top of her when her eyes flew open. They were milky white, the eyes of someone dead. "Get out," she rasped, her voice guttural. I could hear the heartbeat faster and faster, drumming until I thought I couldn't take it anymore. Then I woke up. The sound had been real. Laura's heart was so loud, it felt like it would rupture my eardrums, and I screamed in agony, trying to cover my ears. It was useless. It was coming from some deep place inside me. I could feel it vibrating around the hollows of my chest. I stumbled out of bed, gasping for air, and tried to find my phone. I needed to call someone, anyone, an ambulance or my mum, anyone that would pick up. "Get out." It was a faint whisper over the hammering thumbs of Laura's heart, a low, guttural voice that sounded like it had been made by an animal. I crawled to the door, down the hallway, choking on my screams for help. My neighbour opened the door, his eyes as wide as saucers at the sight of me on the floor, clutching my chest. He drove me to the hospital as I cried in the passenger seat of his car. After about 50 different checkups, the doctors told me there was absolutely nothing wrong with me. They told me my heart was regular, my blood pressure was normal, and that everything was going just swimmingly. I stood in the waiting area, wallowing in my shame and frustration. That heart did not belong to me. My phone buzzed on the counter. An unknown number. Great. That was all I needed. More unexplained, scary things like a stranger on the end of the phone. My voice sounded small on the line. "Hello? Good morning. This is the Thames Valley Police. We've called to report an incident that occurred in your flat at around 1:30 a.m. today." I felt a wave of embarrassment. "I'm so sorry. I recently had surgery and I wasn't feeling well. I had to have my neighbour drive me to the hospital, and I think I panicked a little in the hallway before I left." There was a small silence on the other end of the phone. I'm afraid this is something you might want to be sitting down for." I felt Laura's heart beat, strong and calm. "There was an incident of forced entry by Mr. Samuel Matthews. According to our police record, he's your ex-partner, and you filed a restraining order against him in September." My blood ran cold. "I did. He's in police custody. We found an automatic weapon on him, and we believe he had the intent to harm you. We have an officer currently stationed at your flat who can fill you in, depending on how long your hospital stay will be." I thanked him and hung up the phone. For a moment, I leant against the wall, the horror slowly spreading over me. If I had been in my flat 10 minutes later, he would have found me. Laura's heartbeats filled my ears again, but now they were gentle, calming. Her mother said she dedicated every part of her to helping those who needed it. I put my hand on my chest, overwhelmed by my own gratitude, and listened to Laura. Dad, I saw a zombie." I was in the kitchen making tea when my little girl came rushing in. She ran through the back door so fast she almost tripped up the step. I poured boiling water from the kettle into a mug, hardly looking up. "Oh yeah?" "Yeah, I did. Its face was all pale and messed up. It was gross, Dad." I put the kettle back and picked up the milk. Sighed inwardly. I really had to be more careful about what I watched on TV in the evening. Rosie has a habit of sneaking downstairs in the night, and last week she caught me watching The Walking Dead. Of all things. She's had zombies on her brain ever since. I keep telling her that they're not real, but it doesn't seem to make a difference. "Sweetheart, what did we say about zombies?" I scooped the tea bag out of the mug and dumped it in the bin. "You know if you keep talking about them, Daddy's going to get in trouble with Mummy again." "Yeah, but I saw one." "I know, darling, but I already checked the back garden twice yesterday, and I can promise you it's a zombie-free zone." "No, not in the back garden." "I didn't see it in the back garden." I had the mug half raised to my lips. but now I put it down again. I turned to look at Rosie. Her hair was windswept and her little cheeks were red, as if she'd been running. "Sweetheart," I put on my best, stern, dad's not happy voice. "I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to be honest with me. Have you been playing along the path out back again?" I didn't really need to ask the question, because I already knew the answer. Rosie is allowed to play in the garden on her own, and sometimes, if she asks our permission first, we let her ride her bike along the path at the back of our house, the one that runs past all the neighbours' back gardens, but that's all we allow her to do. This area is pretty safe, but these days you can never be too careful. There was a burglary a couple of roads over a few months back, and last year someone was mugged on the high street. Several years ago, a few towns over, a little boy even went missing. That was quite a long way away from here, of course, but it made national news for a few days until the search fizzled out, and it made a lot of parents more cautious. Rosie's getting older now, and she's an adventurous girl, but still, you have to have boundaries. And on a few occasions lately, Rosie's been crossing those boundaries, riding her bike further than she should, not coming in straight away when we call her, sneaking out the back gate when she's only meant to be playing in the garden. As I watched Rosie now, I noticed her face growing redder. She looked away from me, down at the kitchen floor, and scuffed her feet. "Dad, I only went a little way down," she said. "I promise. I was chatting to Mr. Henderson because I saw him back in his garden. I said hello and made him jump." I sighed. So there it was. Mr. Henderson was Rosie's zombie. Yesterday it was the postman, and the day before that it was a different neighbour. I took a sip of tea and shook my head. Mr. Henderson was, in fairness, a better candidate than the others. The guy lives on his own, and he looks about 100 years old. Moles all over his face, skin like a deflated balloon. Whenever we chatted over the garden fence before, though, he'd always seemed nice enough. Just a bit lonely. I couldn't have Rosie going around calling him a zombie. "Listen to me, sweetheart. I know you didn't go far or anything, but I don't want you," Rosie interrupted. "I came right back after too, Dad." She was staring up at me now, blue eyes large and pleading. "I promise. And I even said no when Mr. Henderson offered me an ice cream, because I know you don't like me taking stuff from strangers." I opened my mouth to respond, then paused. "He offered you an ice cream?" "Yeah, but I said no. Mr. Henderson really wanted me to come in and have one, but I told him I had to get home, and then I came straight back here to tell you I'd seen a zombie." Rosie was babbling now, her voice whirring like a motor, but I stopped listening. My mind was still stuck on something she'd said a moment before. Mr. Henderson really wanted me to come in and have one. I took another sip of tea and frowned. That wasn't good. I didn't mind the neighbours chatting to my little girl, but I didn't like the thought of them inviting her in. Not without us there. Not even if they were just kind, lonely old men. I made up my mind to go round and visit Mr. Henderson later, and to tell him that myself, kindly, of course, but firmly. In the end, though, I didn't get a chance, because a few moments after I'd had the thought, Rosie said something else, something that pushed everything else from my mind, and ended any idea I might have had about going over to Mr. Henderson's house. She said something that made me feel cold. "Daddy, please don't stop me playing in the garden. I promise I won't sneak out again. I don't want the zombie to get me." "Rosie, I'm not going to stop you playing in the garden, but you have to make a couple of promises too. First, promise me you'll stop going around calling people zombies. Mr. Henderson may be old, but he's not one of the living dead." Rosie frowned. "I didn't." "What do you mean you didn't? You just ran in here a moment ago calling him one." "No, I didn't. Mr. Henderson's not a zombie. I saw the zombie in his house, but it wasn't him." I frowned. I had the mug raised to my lips to take another sip of tea, but now I put it down again. "What do you mean, sweetheart? You saw someone else in his house?" "Yeah, the zombie, Dad. I could see it pressed against his little basement window while I was talking to him." Cold fingers ran up my spine. "What?" "Yeah, it was really scary. Its face was all bashed and bloody. Its mouth was open like it was screaming at me. But do you know what confused me most, Dad?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "What?" "Well, I didn't realize kids could be zombies too. I thought it was only grown-ups. But I guess I must have been wrong, because the one in Mr. Henderson's basement looked just like a little boy."